Welcome to the Wisdom Reclaimed podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern life. I'm your host, Layla Sahar, Ayurvedic practitioner, coach, and intuitive, here to support you in awakening the healer within. What if the answers you've been searching for have been with you all along, carried in the timeless practices of ancient rituals, connecting with nature, and pathways of the heart? Here we'll explore how to take responsibility for your life, trust your intuition, and rediscover the wisdom that's always been within you. Hello and welcome to the Wisdom Reclaimed podcast. I'm so excited to have Sahar here today with me, who's a Los Angeles sound artist and sitarist who carries the ragas of her heritage into the rhythms of modern life. Mentored by her maestro, Rajib Karmakar, he layers sitars, bowls, chimes, and sounds from the subcontinent into lush soundscapes she calls safar, or journeys, through vibration and breath. Inspired by Sufi zikr, a love for social justice, and the simple power of rest, her sessions invite listeners to exhale, soften, and remember their own wholeness. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Sahar, to the Wisdom Reclaimed podcast. I am so excited to have you here because when I first met you was during an event and I listened to your beautiful music and your incredible talent. It was just, there was such a resonance with who you are, how you play, how you hold space. And I was just really excited to bring you here today to talk about your journey because I think it's a super unique one in and of itself. So if you could just share a little bit about yourself with the listeners of, you know, maybe what your journey was and what brought you to this point now as a sound artist and sitarist.
Thank you, Lila, for having me. It's so exciting to be here and just to talk about it, just because, you know, I think that everybody that is in the wellness space, they often have like this very specific journey that has led them to do this type of work, right? I mean, and you know, like, so I've always been really musically inclined. Like I've always just like gravitated more towards music. I've been dancing since I was 5. I started dabbling in like instrumental work when I was in middle school. I started with the violin. At the same time, my parents had started learning proper Hindustani classical, you know, with the harmonium and everything. They didn't enroll me in it because they're like, she's busy with her violin. But like what I did was like, I would just sneak off into our den and I would just like pick up the harmonium and I would start playing it. Like I was always like, it was just really easy for me to always like pick up instruments, for me to sing, for me to dance, for me to do really a lot of just different artistic mediums. And it just kind of kept evolving. I stopped in college, going through a lot of things like in my personal life, just a lot of really tough things surrounding marriage, surrounding just who I really wanted to be as a South Asian and Middle Eastern Muslim woman, you know, living in the US, living in diaspora. And I just kept raising a lot of questions. I had a lot of questions about like, why do we do things the way that we do? Why do we believe the things that we do, especially coming from this very Muslim background, right? And that really just led me to then pursue my master's in religion. So, and around that time, that was around the time I was getting married to my husband, my now husband, you know, and that, I think when I was able to do that, that's when I really started taking those questions that I was like having to ask, right, in like this religious studies context. And then I started asking myself those questions. So of course I specialized in Islam and gender studies and all of that, just because I had those questions around my own identity. But then, you know, I wanted to ask those questions and see like, you know, like what about like where we came from? Like what about the indigenous traditions that we come from, right? And then I really started like falling in line with Sufism. And I think when you think about Sufism, you also think a lot about music and poetry. And so I started dabbling in that more. I always loved Qawwali, like growing up. I mean, like, you know, my dad was a huge fan and he was also just really into poetry. So although it was a very Muslim background, we were always just surrounded by that type of artistry. So it was so easy for me to then return to that love of music. And I just kept singing. And then I picked up the harmonium again. I picked up all these practices that I had just like dabbled in my entire childhood. And I then decided like I was going to start playing the sitar. I just felt called to it. It was always something I wanted to do because I knew that I just, you know, I was just blessed with this ability that I knew that I could, if I pick up an instrument, I'll be able to do it. So I chose the hardest one that there is, which is sitar. And I still struggle with it every single day. But then that just, I think, deepened my understanding of just like what my ability was, but it also was able to connect me back a little bit more to even just my own identity, because I was like, wow, sitar is such a like beautiful instrument, and it has such strong ties to current day Iran, and then it also has such a tie obviously to the Indian subcontinent too. So it was truly like a representation of who I am, and I was then able to tie it in into like just different like Sufi works I was listening to. I was listening to a lot of like Abda Parveen, for example, Sabri Brothers, like all these really just beautiful like Sufi artists. And sometimes I will try to dabble and like see if I can like tie sitar into that, listening to ghazals or something like that. Sitar and ghazals are so interchangeable. Finding that was, I think, deeply healing for me. And then that ultimately, like, and then I also started just going to sound baths and learning more about that. Sound baths are considered to be such this very new age practice, right? But here was the thing, me listening to Sufi music, me doing the sitar, that in itself was very much sound healing work. It was just more ancestral for me. And so I then had this idea, and it felt so profound when it came to me. I was like, what if I'm able to tie both of these practices together, and my understanding of religion, the understanding of my identity, my artistry, my love for putting together an event, like I also love to do that, and my sitar skills and this new knowledge. To me, it was new, right? Like, but it's actually quite old, about like frequency and vibrational healing, and how can I make those work all together in like an orchestra of just healing instruments. And that's how I got here. It's kind of a long answer, but I mean, like, yeah, I don't think it's ever a simple answer for anybody who does this type of work.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I feel like there's so many things that I want to talk about based on that. It's such a rich journey that you've had so far, and there's so many elements in that. And what I feel from you, and what I feel when you're playing, when you're creating your art, is really this underlying theme of devotion. And it's so clear now as you're sharing your story of doing your master's in religious studies and always having this inclination towards music, and right, having that natural ability, and yet still understanding that you have to cultivate that devotion, that you have to keep tending to that fire. And that's been a lifelong process, it seems, right, for you. But it's so rare nowadays to find people who are really devoted to their craft, to their art, that are willing to put in years upon years in discovering what it is that they're meant to gift to the world, right? And I really do think that your sound healing is a gift. And it's just such a beautiful representation of who you are and the lineage that you come from and who you are as a modern woman in this world, right? Living in the West. So it's really, really amazing to hear you share about those ancient ways of healing and how you're able to incorporate that in your practice today. I feel like so much of what I do and what you do is like a revival of these old ways that have been forgotten. Ayurveda for sure in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, it's been, long forgotten. And I know with the sitar, it's like, okay, yeah, we know it as this beautiful instrument, but we don't really know it. We don't know the depth of the medicine that it holds, the depth of the practice, and what it can really bring and what it can shift in us, in you as a player, in the audience as listeners. So I'd love to hear kind of your take on the sitar and the history of it, or how it's played such an integral role in sound healing in the region.
That's a really good question. And I think it has a lot to do with just how it's evolved and how it's like, because I mean, the roots of sitar, so it was originally a setar, which people still play, right? Yeah, set means three, right? So you have like, it had 3 strings. Historically, it was a lot smaller. And it was in Iran, right? Like current day Iran, so Persia, whatever you want to call it. And so it was from that region. And I mean, if you think about Persia and just the magnitude of influence that it had on literally everybody around, right? Like Persia had so much influence on Muslim culture, like, if we want to call it a culture, and then obviously on the Indian subcontinent, right? So like when the Mughal Empire was happening, this was like, I think it was like the 1400s, and that's when they brought the sitar over to India, right? And so India, obviously, like, so ragas, or like Hindustani classical music, what we know of it today, right? There's 2 types really. There's like northern Indian music, and then there's there is like the Southern kind, right? Carnatic music, right? And so, this was already being developed for a very, very long time, right? Like already ragas and Hindustani music was already known to be just very, very healing, right? There's specific ragas, there's specific scales that evoke just different times of day, different moods. Some are used for healing. There's a lot more actually in the Carnatic tradition that are known to be healing ragas. And it's because they were already tapped into this concept of, oh, this is like energy. There's something to be said. And like, and oftentimes it was sung, right? So people were singing a lot more. And so like, there's something just very healing about singing together in community. And then also just like being, and if you look at like the chakra system even, right? Like, opening up your throat, right? That is also just extremely, extremely healing, especially like when you're talking about aligning the rest of the energy points in your body. And you see this within Muslim community as well when it comes to zikr. It's all connected. So then obviously like when the Mughal Empire was going on, it was going on for a long time, right? And then the Persians brought over the sitar. Indians saw this and they were just like, wow, this is beautiful, right? And if you listen to even the original sitar, you can kind of see how it's like related to the sitar now. But, they really just took this very beautiful, simple instrument and expanded it. And they were just like, how can we get this to, number one, mimic the human voice? And how can we get it to expand even beyond that? Right? And so then they added a gazillion strings. It's not a gazillion, it's like 20. But they added 20 strings to it, all of which you can play. A little bit more structure to it. They brought the knowledge of Hindustani classical music, and then they started applying it to things that they've been doing for thousands of years. And then that was really when things had started to shift for Hindustani music, was the introduction of the sitar, because it was showing that like, obviously the voice is so beautiful, but the sitar, the way that you can make it twist and turn, and the mastery that's required to play such an instrument, I think that it just really crossed boundaries, like not just country boundaries and cultural boundaries, but the boundaries of the self as well, right? So not only are you trying to mimic the human voice and the range that it has through this vessel, through this instrument, but you're also trying to challenge yourself and see like what your body can do physically, because the sitar can be pretty hard on the body too. And so really going past that, like looking past yourself, like how can I be a conduit of greater power of God, whatever it is, right? And how can I channel that energy into this very important work, into Hindustani music, into this healing thing that that our culture has created, right? So it's just like I get emotional just thinking about it, because it's so beautiful and it's brutal too. Posted about it just a few days ago. Like I had a very long practice session, and I haven't done that since before I was pregnant, and I have a 2-year-old daughter, and it's been quite some time. So, and I remember there was a 6 months during my pregnancy where I couldn't even play. And I was devastated. I was still teaching, but I was devastated that I just couldn't play, because it was just that brutal on the body. And like, I just had to, it was just my body telling me I probably just needed to take a break from sitar. But when I picked it up this past weekend, it was frustrating. It was tough. I haven't really challenged myself in quite some time, I hadn't really sat with it. And honestly, I don't think I made a lot of progress. Maybe my callus got better, like my fingers got a little more flexible, but it was very frustrating. I was very upset. But that's sitar for you. It challenges you. It challenges who you think you are. And I think that in and of itself is powerful and healing as well, because you can get caught up in your ego. But I think mentally, even though I didn't make progress mentally, I do think that there was one bit of progress, and that was just me being that was me humbling myself. And I think that's very, very important in the work that we do, like in the wellness space, right? Like we have to humble ourselves. We have to sometimes, yes, we may be guiding people towards a solution or learning something more about themselves, but really we're vessels ourselves too, right? We're just channeling something that's bigger than all of us. We're just hoping that it gets through to the people that need it the most. And I think that's the realization I made even with this really ridiculous practice session that I did.
Yeah. As you're speaking, it was just like what kept coming to me was, and you said it, being a vessel, and it feels like the sitar is a divine vessel, a channel, right? And as you, as the player, in order to be in coherence with it, also need to become that vessel, right? And so it feels like such a deeply spiritual practice playing the sitar, right? And it brings up all of this ego in you and humbles you just like a spiritual path would, right? So it's like, and what I keep getting, and I know this from my own journey in trying to become a human instrument, right, of the divine wisdom, trying to empty myself. I just did a shamanism workshop or training this past weekend, and in shamanism we talk about becoming the hollow bone. So this hollow vessel, essentially, to receive that information. In other contexts you can call it a channel, right, a vessel. But what it is like, the more I can empty myself, the more I can hold, right? And so that's the challenge. And when we have these conceptions about who we are as a healer, who we are as a sitarist, right? Those then become blocks for us. And it feels like what you did this weekend is to remove some of those blocks. Right? And that's not an easy lesson to learn. It's not comfortable for us. That's why most of the time we don't do it. And that just shows your character to willingly want to sit down for 3 hours and practice an instrument and not get very far. That shows your humility, And most people, unfortunately, nowadays are not willing to put in that time to get the results that you're going to get eventually, right? It's not maybe today, but eventually you will get those results. I mean, that's the path that you're on. And I think a lot of what we've talked about is just the lack of commitment to these practices, right? Like, we can talk about them and we can revive them and share them, but if an individual is not willing to commit in whatever way that they can, right? And that might be in a small way, and you can do 5-minute breath work in a day, right? Or you can sit down, and for me myself, I can sit down at this harmonium and play a little bit each day. That's the commitment that it takes in order to get somewhere. We have to take those little steps. I'm curious if you've had struggles along the way in your path to playing the sitar. It sounds like it came very naturally to you, but maybe what are some of the challenges that you've faced that have kind of matched your spiritual path and journey?
I love this question. Oh my God, this might be my favorite question so far. But definitely when I first started playing the sitar, like I already had a very rudimentary understanding of Hindustani music. I was like, I know sargam, I know sarigama padanista sanidabama. I knew that already. I knew how to match that even in voice. Like I knew where to find that on the harmonium, all of that. So when I picked up the sitar, it was more just really just learning the position. But I mean, I was always musically inclined, right? Like, so it was tough, but it wasn't like, I mean, I see some other people who first start sitar, and not to say that they're like any worse or even better than me or anything, right? I know some amazing sitar players that have a really rocky start, right? But for me, it was really quick, right? It was just oh, okay. I think, but there were definitely some things that I had to do in the beginning, right? That started to challenge a lot of what I was thinking of myself mentally. So it started off by me realizing, okay, I can't really have fake nails anymore. Right. Yeah. And I was just okay, I have to get rid of those. Yeah. Another thing is I have this permanent callus here. I mean, just Google sitar fingers and you'll see people get bruised and and bloodied up sometimes because it's just that brutal on your fingers. There was that, right? And then there were little things my back pains and my hip pains that started. But those were some just some of the beginning things that I had to really figure out how to maneuver that. But it still wasn't bad, right? It was just okay, those are small adjustments that I have to make. I think it really hit me when I was pregnant. I had a gig lined up and I was newly pregnant, and I had to tell my sitar teacher, I had to tell my guru, because I had a gig lined up and it was for this really amazing performance. It was supposed to be for this Kathak. Kathak is North Indian classical dance. It was the first time I was ever going to do something like that. I was so excited. I was just oh my God, the piece was really gorgeous. I was learning it with Rajib. And then I realized like literally like a week before that I couldn't do it. And it was because I started getting severe sciatica pain, for which I had to be in physical therapy for the rest of my pregnancy. Realized I couldn't sit, realized I couldn't play. I couldn't do it. And it was that feeling of despair and devastation that I felt then, that like, and I almost had like anger towards my unborn child. I was like, I can't even play this. Like one of the things that I love the most, I couldn't even be with it. And I think that desire was really what brought up me just like starting to question the spiritual journey, right? Because here I am pregnant, supposedly one of the most beautiful things that I'm supposed to experience in life, right? And me despising it, me hating it. And I was like, why am I feeling this way? Like, I should be elated to be pregnant. I've always wanted this, right? So that definitely like challenged me in my spiritual journey, because it was like, and it was interesting because it was almost as if my body was just telling me to, like, it's also okay to let Sitar go. Sometimes Sitar is there for you and sometimes it's not. Right. And, but it will be waiting like whenever you are ready to go back to it. And that's something I had to understand. I was like, okay, I have to understand that it is waiting for me. I will come back to it. And so I think that was a key element that I had to learn. I had to learn patience. And I'm not a patient person. I am not. I've become very patient through both of these journeys, through motherhood, but also through having to wait to play. And I think that is probably patience, I think, is one of the most profound things that we can learn in a spiritual journey, because sometimes like you're just not ready to learn something, right? You're just not in the right mental space to take something on, because of whether it's a physical thing going on in your life or if it's like just a situational thing, right? And, and I think all of that, it just kind of shows divine intervention, right? Like, I think God brought me back to Sitar when I needed it. And that's why I was able to now just sit down and be like, okay, I need to take this seriously. I feel like, I'm going to do it again and again and again and again and again until I'm able to really lift my skills up to where I want them to be. And I mean, I'm going to be playing, I've been playing Sitar for like 9 years now, and I still would not say that I'm an expert at all. Not even close. But I got to be patient till I can get there and call myself.
Wow. Well, that's the humility that you have. You think, I was again bringing it back to shamanism. There are shamans who have been practicing and learning their whole lives and would not call themselves shamans, right? And it's like that humility aspect of it. Like, even though you've been playing this instrument for 9 years, it's like, the depth of it. How deep it goes. And again, I think that's like the reverence of the practice and the instrument and of the culture around, right? What it means to be a master at Sitar, or what it means to be a master shaman, or what it means to be a master Ayurvedic doctor, right? So there's so much there. And that I want to pick up on that theme of patience, because it's like, yes, that is what the spiritual journey, I feel like, is all about. I know from my experience, it's all a bit about patience of like, and even your journey with the pregnancy, it feels like, you were being a divine vessel to bring life into this world. So you didn't have space to do the other vessel work because your vessel was full already, like literally full. So God was like, okay, you got enough going on. Let's just pause this practice. It'll be there. And luckily, you listen to that. And I think that's such an important lesson for so many people out there, because we live in a culture and in a world that's like more, now, and we don't know when to stop. We don't know when to pause. We don't know when it's enough, right? And it's like, I see this in the healing world as well. It's like one training after another. And I love learning. That's like, I will be a forever student, but I've learned that it's so important for us to take time to integrate things, right? To take those sacred pauses, those moments of reflection and that doesn't mean that you're not going to continue on the path, but it does mean that, I've been on this path for this long. Let me take a pause and see, is this still in alignment with me? Because you're going through a huge shift, which is becoming a mother. That's a huge transition. And that's an important one for you to honor as well. And it's like, okay, I pause and see, am I ready to go back to sitar? Is sitar now still going to be a part of my life, right? And we can apply that to so many other things in our lives. I think it's such an important question for us to ask, especially when we're in these pivotal moments of change, of just taking that sacred pause. And the sitar taught that to you, you know, without you really necessarily wanting it, right? But it was like, oh, your body was like, nope, this is not happening. And you're like, oh, so I love that. Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that you still would not consider yourself a master, like at sitar. Like, what does it take to master an instrument like the sitar?
It's I feel like this is such a big question. I do think that like, I feel like the humility part is big. I feel like I've got that down. I had to learn the hard way, for sure. I had to constantly be humbled, whether that was in the presence of other students or my guru. He was really good at humbling me. I think he picked up on it, that I was kind of full of myself. He would definitely call me out and be like, you know, you're not the best player. Like, you got to relax. You know, because again, I had picked it up so fast. It was really easy for me to just be like, yeah, like, I'm good. And so like, definitely like the humility part, I've like now picked it up where I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not there. And here's what's interesting though. I don't even know if Raji would call himself a master, but to me he totally is. I'm just like, no, like that man's crazy. I mean, like if you've ever seen him play live, you could probably look him up on YouTube. His hand is a blur, like when he plays. I mean, truly, like one of the fastest players I've ever, probably the fastest player I've ever seen, like ever. And so I definitely think like there is obviously an element of technical skill, and it's just like no matter what, right, there's always just something to learn, right? And then I think also just really building I don't want to say following. I think the better word here would be community. Building a community of people that is supportive of your work, right? Like, it's like, what are you known for? Like, and I'm not trying to say it in a way where it's like, oh, I need to toot my own horn. But every sitarist has sort of their signature, like what they're really, really known for. Rajib, one of his signatures, he's known for speed. He's probably the fastest sitarist I've ever seen in my life. There's other sitarists who specialize in like heavy metal, right? Like that's a thing that they do, and they're really, really good at it. Some sitarists are just very classical. And then there's like sitarists like Anushka Shankar. Like her legacy, she's like Ravi Shankar's daughter. And she's also one of the very few female sitarists too. And then she does jazz. She does a lot of different mediums. That's her signature. I think finding that is a really big element in really identifying if you're a master or not. I'm working on it. Like, I feel like I'm starting to identify that no, sound healing is my niche. That's what I'm specializing in. This is what I want to focus on. I want to see what type of meditative work, like really focusing on the meditative aspects of sitar and bringing that in. So yeah, just to summarize, humility, prestige, and then technical skill, like I said. Like those would really be the main things that kind of create a master. So I think it's also, and I'm going to go forward and say like another one is just the commitment, like, you know, just being really committed to it, really carving out that time to just do it. And I feel like I just now, after almost a decade, am finally there where I'm like, I'm really committed to this. Like I'm in it. I'm not leaving, you know. There were a lot of times where I was back and forth, but I'm like, nah, like this is me. This is what I'm going to do till the day I die. I've never said that out loud before. Like, yeah, like I guess I'm doing it forever. Wow.
That's the lifelong commitment for you. You know, that's such an amazing commitment. And most people don't ever get to that in their life about anything, you know, save maybe marriage, but like most people aren't committed. And we were talking about it even before this episode around commitment of like, for me, it's like, yeah, my meditation practice and my yoga practice, Ayurveda, it's like I'm being called to go to that next level of not just doing an hour a day, right? Doing multiple hours in a day, having weekends, right? That where I just totally shut off from this realm and go into my meditative space. I think we're being called to that for our crafts. And unfortunately, our modern world, again, doesn't really promote or give space for that. It's like, oh no, don't be committed to anything. You know, I mean, let's not even go to like polyamory, right? It's like, don't commit. You don't need to commit. Just don't do it. But there's so much beauty in committing, right? And there's so much fire that comes from that. And that is the fire of creation, right? Like you can only create when you really commit. So it's like if we want, and we can take this at a grand scale, right? Like if we want to create a beautiful world, we have to commit to those beautiful things that can create that for us. And for you, and everybody has their own path, right? For you, it's the sitar and sound healing. For me, it's Ayurveda and the ancient healing systems of the world. And so, you know, I'm curious with sound healing, how you've seen maybe in your own life or in the lives of people that you've played for, how it impacts them on the level of healing. Like, have you seen anything? And I'm sure you've experienced it because it's what you're doing, but any examples you would love to give?
Yes. So I think the first person that comes to mind is my husband. Now, I love my man. Like he's a wonderful, wonderful human being. Like I'm so lucky I got partnered and paired with him in this life because I mean, he's just a perfect, perfect person. Like, and we met when we were very, very young. And like around the time we met was when I started playing sitar. And, you know, when I started noticing this about him. He started like, and now mind you, he is musical. Like we both are born and raised from Atlanta. He was very much in the hip hop scene. So he would like, you know, he did a lot of like hip hop songs, like with his friends. He had a lot of producer friends and he just dabbled a lot. But when we got married, I started realizing something. Anytime I was practicing sitar or I would just be playing, or even like when I started doing sound baths and like doing those sessions, right? I started noticing that number one, he would participate. And which is so odd for me to see him do because, you know, he was so much like, he's always just like, you know, he's always doing his own thing. He's always busy. He's always like working on something in the house or something like that, right? But whenever I would play or do a sound bath, he would pause everything and he would sit there and he would participate. So that was number one. I was just like, okay. And I just kind of just continued to observe that. And then second thing was he started like, he would start singing some of the compositions that I would be playing in perfect pitch. He would memorize them, right? And this is a man who struggles to remember a lot of things. Like he's just not, you know, he's really good at a lot of things, but you know, memory is not one of them. But he would memorize like these complicated ragas that I was learning, like with like the bends and the twists and everything. And he would say it in like perfect sargam. Like he would be like, Sapa, like, you know, he would like, and he would say it exactly in the notes that they would need it to be in. It was wild. It was something to see. Fast forward to, you know, our daughter being born, the light of our lives, honestly. Like she's a wonderful little girl. You know, like obviously sleep was like non-existent for a really long time. But, you know, I found him like, you know, like nodding off, you know, like at the end of the night. But like sometimes when he would start nodding off, like he would just start humming like ragas that I haven't even played in years as he was nodding off. And I'd be like, sweetheart, you're singing, you're singing and you're falling asleep. And he was like, oh, I was? Okay, cool. And like there are some compositions that he will just like randomly just be belting out. Things that I haven't played in forever. And that just really, really resonate with him. And like, you know, and then I started really diving in deep into what some of those ragas that he was really listening to, what they meant. And it just so happened that the ones that he was singing the most were the ones that were intended specifically for healing or better sleep, like promoting relaxation. He lives very, very he lives a very busy lifestyle. Or like, you know, he has work. He has like me and my daughter. My mother-in-law also lives with us and she's elderly, takes care of her. The man's stressed. Like he's stressed. And yet he's able to like meditate on these ragas that he didn't even know were intended for healing, but he just naturally gravitated towards that. That's one example that I can just think of from the top of my head. There's other things too that I've just like experienced. Like there's this one rag that I play that's quite powerful. I actually played it at the panel we did together. It's called Bhairav, and it's a very deep, like introspective kind of dark, moodier vibe to it. But a lot of what people will report back to me is like they will get like really strong imagery, and oftentimes they'll imagine like dusk or even like, you know, like the sun right before it rises. And then they'll also imagine a lot of desert and a lot of sand. And those are all like imagery that like tends to evoke Bhairav in general. It's almost like a collective consciousness that I seem to see happen, like where people are really starting to feel like, oh, like this is what I saw. This is what this sound did for me. This is what this specific scale does to me. That's really, if you think about it, right? Like to imagine that like a simple scale of notes can evoke like imagery like deserts and dusk and twilight and different smells. Like people sometimes experience different smells in that. I think that that's so profound and like really just speaks to the power that is within this music, you know, and like it's fascinating just to see that like these simple scales that were written thousands of years ago are now promoting this type of healing in people like in our modern world in 2025, right?
That's so powerful. From your husband to the imagery that people are sharing with you. And it just goes to show you that, you know, these ragas are truth, right? And that's how I see them, as like the only reason why these things are happening is because there is truth in those sound frequencies that is universal, right? It doesn't take language to understand them, right? You don't need to know the words. And that's the beauty also of Sanskrit and a lot of the music and the sounds that come from that region of the world, right? The ancient seers, they received this information. It was not created necessarily. It was like downloaded. And so when you think about that, then of course, when you hear it, you're seeing the same image, because that is where that information was received from, or for the purpose that it was received. And within, you know, Ayurveda, we have healing ragas as well. And I'm sure those are the ones that you're kind of talking about, right? For the doshas. And it's like there's music therapy within Ayurveda, which overlaps with what you do. And for somebody who has more earth and water, there's a specific, you know, rag that you can play, or fire, there's specific rags you can play, or air and space, there's specific rags you can play, right? And in quantum mechanics, we talk about how everything in this universe is just vibration. And so, of course, when you're playing a certain vibration of music, you know, and we humans have this thing of resonance, right? We're always trying to attune ourselves to the vibration and the frequency of the spaces that we're in. So if there's that musical tuning fork, right, we're going to attune to it. And that's where the healing really comes in. And so it's like these practices, these vibrations are timeless, right? You don't have to play music of today to have the same effect, because again, they cross the boundaries of language, they cross the boundaries of time, and they're just so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm so excited to see it evolve for you, and for you to continue to receive evidence of the powerful work that you're already doing. You know, the last question that I have for you kind of links to, I know a big thing for you is creating spaces of deep rest for people. And I know in your sound healing, that's kind of one of the big things. You want people to be comfortable. You're the active player, you're the vessel. Everybody is just the receiver, right? And I'm curious as to your perspective, like what role do you think rest plays in the future of humanity?
That's such a good question. So I think we're also in a very interesting time, right? Where like, you know, we're in this world of AI and really just like streamlining processes. I feel like I always hear things like that, streamlining, automation. This is just what's actively happening in our world. And, you know, I think like we can either accept it, or we can, you know, just kind of just be on the sidelines and watch it happen, because it's going to be inevitable. So I think when that's happening, right, we have to really imagine what a new world is going to look like, right, as jobs are taken away. And I mean, obviously, like I think there's a lot of people that are scared, you know, and rightfully so, right? Like, you know, there's people that are like, oh my gosh, like with the introduction of AI and robotics and all of these different things, you know, a lot of people aren't going to have jobs, right? I like to take that information and try to think of it in a more positive way, right? I'm like, okay, if there's going to be a lot more people that don't have jobs, then like, what are we going to be doing with our time, right? Like my hope is that like, you know, people that are doing the work that like you're doing, like focusing on Ayurveda, me focusing on sound healing, or anybody that's doing work in wellness, my hope is that that's going to gain priority, where hopefully people will look to. Right. And then in the hopes that they'll want to like heal themselves. And so I think it's very important that we're continuing to hold that space and continue to offer that space, because people are going to realize that like, okay, now that everything's automated, what else is left? Like, you know, if I don't have to worry about this hustle or worry about like, you know, getting to a certain result of something, if that's all being taken away, what's left? These ancient healing traditions. So I think that's important, right? And I think we're really going to end up, I think, returning to our roots in a big way. I do strongly believe that everybody's going to return back to these sorts of communities where we're structured around music, where we're structured around poetry, because that's all that's we're gonna have. Yeah, I know a lot of people are very like anti-AI for this very reason, right? And rightfully so, right? Like, I mean, I think it's scary as well. But I, again, try to think about it in this way where it's just like, we're going to be the ones that are carving out this space, right? And offering this to people. And I think it's even more important that we're offering it to people who come from similar backgrounds as we do, right? Because those are the people that are going to need the Rust the most, right? If you think about like our communities here in the West, right? Like where we come from, like we're in the diaspora, right? What are our communities known for? They're known for working really, really hard. Yeah. They're known for pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. Like, these types of phrases that Americans love to use, right? But what does our life look like when we're not doing that, right? Like, can we maybe get to a point where, we're just in circle together playing like music together, where we're in circle, like, doing meditation together? Are we like, maybe reciting poetry to each other? Maybe we're telling each other that we love each other more, right? Like using our words, like things that don't require a phone or like, a mode of like getting paid to do something, right? So I think that that's really, really important. My hope is that's all we're going to be doing. I think eventually we're going to be forced to rest, because I think our future generations, us included, of course, we deserve to rest. We've been through a lot. Our ancestry has been through so much. And I think that's why it's so important that people like you, people like myself, like people like, like all the other amazing healers that we know, that we are offering this to people who are like us. So I'm excited to see like what my daughter and her children, and even, I mean, let's see, my grandchildren will be up to, right? I would be so happy to know that they're living a life of rest and leisure, because that's what our ancestors wanted for all of their descendants. Like, I don't want this life for my daughter. I don't want her to work in a tech startup. Like, come on. Like, no. I don't want her to like fuel an AI machine. No, I want her to rest. I want her to be in community. I want her to create music. I want her to dance. I want her to express. And so I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Love that vision. And I hope that, the path that AI takes us down is the path of rest and not a path of virtual reality instead. So let's plant those seeds of rest into the world. Thank you so much, Sahar, for being here, for sharing your wisdom. I would love if you could share maybe where people can find you, what events you're doing, website, Instagram, anything where people can look you up and get some of your medicine.
Thank you, Layla. This was wonderful. Yeah, definitely give me a follow. I'm Sounds by Sahar on Instagram. My website is saharsound.com. Like, I have a few weekly sessions per week, but come by, see me, ask questions. I love questions, obviously. Yeah, can't wait to see people.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.